Too as well. All right, guys, TGIF. Today's one of those Fridays. I guess the whole week has been one of those weeks where I feel like I don't even know what day it is, but I'm thrilled that it is Friday. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Allison Egidi. I'm a pediatric sleep coach. I'm located in the Charlottesville, Virginia area. And I am the founder of Sleep and Wellness Coach, which is about to celebrate its 10-year anniversary. So I will have been a sleep coach for 10 years in June. And every single month for the last 10 years, I have done a free sleep Q&A. And it's kind of changed format because, live video wasn't really a thing back initially. But in more recent months, it's been through live video on Instagram and then on YouTube. I'm thinking about testing out another platform that I'm not as good at using, but just for fun. But the way it works is a post went up on Instagram yesterday inviting people to submit questions in advance. And so I'm going to start with those pre-submitted questions. And then if anyone hops on live and they didn't have a chance to submit a question in advance, you can absolutely put it in the comments. Once I get through the pre-submitted questions, I will circle back to any live questions that came in the comments while we're on here. And if you're coming back and watching the replay, a couple things you should know is I have a podcast called How Long Till Bedtime. And I think I just recorded episode 242. So several years of weekly podcast episodes, and you can find answers to a lot of questions. And I've discussed a lot of topics on that podcast. So if you don't get your question answered today or a question comes up, you can always go search the How Long Till Bedtime podcast. Easiest to search on Spotify. And you can also learn more about how we work with families. So it's me, and I have two sleep coaches on my team, Ellen and Sophie. And you can learn more about how we work with families in one-on-one coaching at sleepandwellnesscoach.com. And then there's also a page on that website. There's a work with us page, and then there's a page where you can get on-demand workshops and other programs there. So you can find all of that on my website, sleepandwellnesscoach.com. Okay. I'm going to start here with these pre-submitted questions. Let me find it here. All right. I had to pull up the Instagram questions over on my computer. All right. And always the handles, you guys. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, or some people put their name, some people put creative things. This is from Carrie Worcester. Said, hi, my daughter's 13 and a half months old. Her morning wake time is usually 6:30 to 7, and she usually falls asleep at night 7:30 to 8. We start her bedtime routine at 7. Her nap times are variable. Sometimes she takes a morning nap around 10 a.m. and an afternoon nap around 3, and sometimes she takes only one nap. My question is, at this age, should my daughter still be fighting sleep? She usually cries when we put on her sleep sack and then cries again for 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes when we put her in the crib. How much crying is too much? And how do we know when to give up with a nap attempt? And then you said update. This week she's been crying longer than 10 minutes. Sometimes I think it's teething pain. Okay. First, I want to address the teething pain, because teething, when I talk about teething, I joke that it's the fastest way for me to lose followers or subscribers to my YouTube or to my newsletter, because it's a very touchy topic. And when our kids aren't sleeping well, we want to find a reason for it. And teething is a very common one. that people will come up with, because part of the reason it's so common is teething is a constant, you guys. You can find this, you can look up charts. Like Cleveland Clinic, I think, has a chart of the patterns of teething, and probably Mayo Clinic, but I have found them before. But you can find charts for teething where basically once it starts between like 4 and 6 months, they are in some phase of teething all the way until they're like 3.5 years old. And while we can't know for sure with an infant, I fall into the camp of believing that teething is more like a bum knee, not an injured knee, not like a acute injury, but like a bum knee. And it's more like it's not going to wake you up in the middle of the night. But if you wake up, you might be like, "Oh god, that bum knee." Yeah, I could still kind of feel it. It might be annoying. And that's not to say kids don't have some discomfort, because obviously we'll see our infants and stuff drooling or chewing on their hands. So I do think there could be some like throbbing or interesting sensation going on, but I don't think it causes wakings. Is it possible in your situation that she's already not feeling great and she's complaining, and then it kind of makes things feel even less than ideal? It's possible, but sounds like this has been going on for a while, and I wouldn't let it, quote, "be her excuse for not sleeping well." And I don't say this to, like, annoy people, because you guys, if I could blame problems that appear to be hard to fix in the sleep department on teething, my job would be so much easier. Like, if I ever got hung up with a child who was particularly challenging as far as like figuring out their sleep puzzle, and I could be like, "Oh, let's chalk it up to teething," that'd be a really easy excuse. So when I say I don't let teething interfere with sleep, that's something I'm saying that's like making my job not easier, because now we need to find out what is interfering with sleep. So I always tell people, try to put like teething a little bit on the back burner for your reasons things are funky. Now, you're in an interesting stage of sleep at 13 and a half months, because you're in that stage of, it's ideal if she's on 2 naps, but she might be starting to phase out of being on 2 naps. So I'll tell you what I generally like to see for this age group would be 11 to 12 hours of night sleep, and then 2 to 3 hours of day sleep. So one thing I would do, so one thing, when she's falling asleep 7:30 to 8. So just make sure that she's getting at least 11 hours of night sleep. And I do have this kind of thought with, is she complaining because the whole thing's out of alignment with her rhythm? So the schedule that you're doing would be for a child that I would say typically falls with a later natural biological sleep rhythm. And if it were working beautifully, I'd say, great, you're probably in alignment with her rhythm. But if she's complaining, she's either complaining because we're out of alignment with her rhythm. We've kind of missed her sleep wave, and she's like kind of not feeling that pull to sleep when we put her down. Or she has this thought, even though if you haven't maybe done anything to give this idea to her, that if she just keeps complaining, you'll come in. But maybe you have, because you said in here, like, is there time that's too long? So maybe you have a breaking point where, like, if she cries for this amount of time, I'll go in and respond. And so then she's pushing back more and more. So you might want to consider shifting her bedtime to being, I usually like a 7 p.m. bedtime with a 6 to 7 a.m. wake up. So I would consider trying a 7 p.m. bedtime, see if you notice if she goes down any easier. And then I like that morning nap. 10 a.m.'s fine. I would experiment with 9:30 to 10. See if she happens to go down any easier at 9:30. If not, stick with 10, but I would cap that first nap at 1 hour of sleep. Well, actually, I do 2 things. If she's not asleep within 30 minutes of putting her down for the first nap, pull the plug, put her back down at noon for her second nap. If she does fall asleep within 30 minutes, cap it at 1 hour of sleep. And then I would probably test out like 2:30 for that third nap. That nap, I'd give her like a whole hour in the crib, and my cutoff for when to wake her up then would be 4. So A little schedule shift could be potentially really helpful to her. And then when you say, like, she usually cries when you put her in her sleep sack, that's just kind of anticipation, and it could be that she's overtired and we're not in alignment with her rhythm. But one thing that you wanna think about when she does that is don't change anything you're doing and keep moving with the routine. So if she starts to cry when you put her in her sleep sack, you can say, "Oh my gosh, I know you're so tired. It's gonna feel so good to go to sleep. Okay, I'm gonna sing you a song and put you in your crib, and you're gonna get so much great sleep all the way until nap time's over or until the morning." Kind of tell her what to expect from you. And if your plan is to not go back, which I wouldn't if she's crying like 5 or 10 minutes, um, even a little longer, I would say, and if you're crying, that's okay, but mommy's not going to be coming back because it's time to be sleeping. So she's at this age where I'd start to put some words around what's going to be happening and what she can expect from you. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Alrighty, let me scroll down here to Andrea Thomas. Hey, Andrea. You said, "Hi, Allison. Miss M is 3.5 years old and has been a great little sleeper until just recently. She has been having night wakings and nap refusal and bedtime resistance." What? We don't like that. "Which is getting increasingly worse, probably since the beginning of the year. She's at daycare 4 days a week where she doesn't sleep anymore." That's a drag because that's a long day. So we changed her days so she only has 2 days in a row. The middle day, she's with her nan, where she can either fall asleep in the car and be transferred or refusing sleep till as late as 1:30 before taking her nap, which we let her could sleep if we let her, she could sleep for 3 hours. We always try to get her up around 3. She can then take a long time to fall asleep at night, sometimes as late as 8 p.m. She is in bed around 7. On weekends, she'll eventually fall asleep for a nap and again can mostly sleep for a few hours, and we usually have to wake her. Her nighttime wakings at the moment, she's claiming she's cold. Interesting. She's in winter PJs, and I have a heater going because it's winter in Australia. She refuses to sleep sack of any kind, and the blanket struggles to stay on her. She falls back asleep quickly after I put her back to bed. She's in a toddler bed in the same room as her big sister, Miss K. Should we be capping her naps on the 3 days to shorter naps? How can I word it to her to not come out of her room and just put the blanket back on herself, which I know she can do, and get her to actually do it? I have toddler clock and hallway light that change color. Okay, so a couple things. At 3.5, she's certainly in a window where she might need a nap some days, but not all days. And usually they will drop home naps before daycare naps, but it seems like she's starting to resist that. That's probably there's something going on in the classroom. There might be other kids who don't nap, and she's jumping on that train. So here's what I would say. I would try to do her nap between around 12:30 on the day she's home. Um, and I would cap it, test out. She's in the age where I'd say an hour to an hour and a half would be the max. So we want to do an hour to an hour and a half nap, wake her up, and then still stick to your 7 p.m. bedtime. On the days that she doesn't nap, if it works in your work schedule, you could do a bedtime as early as 6:30, and definitely on the weekends if she doesn't nap. Try to do a 6:30 lights out, because sometimes what happens with this age group is they skip a nap and then they kinda get overtired, and then they kinda kick into second wind mode earlier than they would even if they were napping well. So that's the change I would make is cap that nap, test out what happens after if you only let her nap an hour, test out what happens if you let her nap an hour and a half, and then work in that 6:30 to 7 p.m. lights out. And then with the blanket, I would do some role playing with her and say, "Okay, um, Everyone's gonna be working on being a sleep champion, and a sleep champion follows their sleep rules, which, is the bedtime routine, stays in their room until the light turns green without waking sleeping people. And this is important, because we don't want her waking her sister, but then also we don't want her coming to wake you about the blanket. So you can say, "We're all gonna work on being a sleep champion. You're gonna follow your sleep rules, and you're gonna sleep all night in your room and stay in your room until your light turns green without waking sleeping people. And if you wake up and your blanket has come off, the good news is you could pull it back on yourself." And then I would do some role playing with her. So have her get in the bed and say, and this is like during the day, say, "Okay, let's pretend that you're sleeping." So you've been tucked in, you fall asleep. Okay, pretend you're sleeping in the bed. And then move the blanket off of her where you might find it when you typically go in, when she wakes you up. And say, so let's say you wake up and your blanket fell off. Now sit up and like find your blanket and pull it back on. So see if you can have her practice, because you're role playing that process of finding the blanket. So um that's the ideal scenario if she'll cooperate with role playing. If she won't cooperate with the role playing, then you can do the role playing where if she's like, "No, I don't want to do that," you can be like, "Okay, cool. I'm going to pretend I'm you." And so then you get in the bed, pretend you have the blanket on, have the blanket fall off, and then be like, "Oh, look, I woke up, my blanket's off. I'm cold. Here's what I'm gonna do," and show her what it looks like. And then whether she's kinda interested in participating in that or not, you've still kinda made the point that she can get the blanket back on herself. And I will teach kids as young as 2 to pull blankets back on, so she absolutely can do it. And so then I would just tell her, "Okay, so starting tonight, if you wake up, you can pull your own blanket back on, and mom's not gonna pull the blanket back on. And then if she does wake you up, you'll remind her at bedtime she's working to be a sleep champion who doesn't wake sleeping people. But then if she does wake you up, you could walk her back to her room, but instead of pulling her blanket back on, you'll tell her like, "Okay, come on, you can do it. Pull your blanket back on," and like hold to her doing it. And then if she's refusing to, you can also say like, "Well, the good news is you can sleep without your blanket." Um, and I'm curious about her being cold. I mean, I know it's winter in Australia, and I don't know about the temperatures, and I'm sure you guys aren't on Fahrenheit. Um, but sometimes, more likely than being cold, unless you keep your house really cool, a child be more this age would be more likely to have a night waking because they're too warm than being too cold. And so I think you said you have her in winter fleece pajamas, right? Did you say that on here? I think you did. Um, I'm down for long sleeve for sure, and giving her a blanket. And we're not trying to freeze her out, but just make sure you're not like, holy when she if she wakes you up and you touch her, I'm curious, like, if you're like, "She actually feels warm, not cold." Just be thoughtful about that, because we don't making the room warmer and warmer and dressing her warmer and warmer could actually cause night wakings. So, but of course, if she's cold, I want her to be able to pull her blanket back on. But I just kinda get a little curious about that. As a point of reference, you'll have to find the calculation, to Celsius on this. For my kids in my house, and I know even the air conditioning and heating units are so unique house to house, but my right now with the air conditioning on, my kids like it at 66 to sleep best, as do I actually. Um, and then in the winter, we keep it at like 68. So it's like 66 to 68. I usually don't recommend being above 70. So somewhere in that 66 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, is what I would test out. So hopefully that tweak to the language and the role playing and the capping of the nap and all these little pieces will help it come together for you, Andrea. And I hope you're doing well over in Australia. Long time no talk. Okay, let me see here. Labradorable Coop and C is the handle. Said our 20-month-old son has been struggling with taking up to 2 hours to fall asleep and waking during the night for an hour or two since bringing his baby sister home. Not uncommon. He was starting to regress some before baby, but now the last 3 months have been really rough. We capped his nap at 2 hours, but are wondering if we should shorten them to an hour and a half to get him to sleep through the night. Bedtime is 7:30, but he doesn't fall asleep until 8:45. We get him up at 7 in the morning, but he usually wakes closer to 6. Not ideal because now we're trending closer to 9 to 10 hours of sleep. Nap time is around 12:30. We will do an earlier bedtime if he doesn't nap at all. He never cries, but runs around his crib like a crazy boy. Oh, that's interesting. Rather than lying down and going to sleep. Would so much appreciate helping us get back on track. Well, that's an interesting little side note there at the end, the running around and not like crying as the protest part of the process. So, what I like to see at this age, so at, 28 months, so just over 2, is 11 to 12 hours of night sleep. So we know at this point we're short there. So 11 to 12 hours of night sleep, and then usually a minimum of an hour and a half, but more often than not, 2 to 2.5 hours of day sleep. So I am not inclined to have you further cap the nap. It's only at 2 hours at this point. Um, what I don't think you put in here, oh yeah, he does nap time. Um, is so s I don't know how well he's going down for nap, but a 12:30 nap time is fine, and if he's napping 2 hours, it's probably fairly in alignment, with his rhythm. So here are some things to keep an eye on because this is an interesting one. Um, everything you're saying, I'm like, "Oh, I have so many more questions." Um, but I would say go ahead and have him up after 2 hours of sleep or 3 p.m. at the latest. So 2 hours of sleep at 3 p.m. And then I want you to test out instead of bedtime 7 to 7:30. And I've noticed there's so many things in parenting where we all have different definitions, and bedtime is one of them. So when you say bedtime is 7 to 7:30, when I say bedtime, in my mind, that's in the bed, lights out. Sometimes people say that's the beginning of the nighttime routine. I'm not sure. I think yours you're describing is in the bed, lights out, but I want him to be in the bed, lights out in the 6:30 to 7 window. And I want you to pay very close attention to when it's easier for him to fall asleep because I suspect what's happening is he's catching a second wind. And so we kind of missed his natural biological pull to sleep. He's caught a second wind, and then he's like rip roaring around the crib until he tires out and then he goes to sleep. So 2-hour nap, up by 3, down in the crib, lights out between 6:30 and 7. And be super thoughtful about that hour before lights out that he's not rip roaring around. Because the other thing that can sometimes happen when we start to have mobile toddlers is, and it's not just that we think it, it's recommended by a lot of people online that they're like, wear them out, get the wiggles and the jumps out right before bedtime. And like all things, if that works for your kid, great. But for many, many kids, doing a little like chase around the kitchen, or in the case of one of my kids, running up the stairs to take her bath would take her an hour to fall asleep because for her, that running up the stairs to the bath was the equivalent of me running 2 miles and trying to go right to bed. Or currently, when I play my evening tennis matches, I played one this week and I didn't fall asleep till midnight, even though I got home at 9. Because when I exercise in that window, when I'm supposed to be going to bed, it just gives you all those endorphins and the hormones, and it's hard to fall asleep. So the other thing with him, I don't know what you're doing in that evening, but in addition to moving that bedtime up, be super thoughtful about the hour before bedtime. And so a good little rule of thumb would be once we sit down for dinner, there's no more TV running, jumping, tickling, wrestling, all those things, the active things. And I get that that's tricky at this age, but see if that helps so that he's winding down and falling asleep. And then also, obviously, he could rip roar around his crib in the dark, but make sure his room's super dark. And there's not natural light coming in because now the days are getting longer, and that could also make it easier for him to fall asleep if we keep the room super dark. Okay. Um, and we want him waking between 6 and 7, and sometimes the earlier bedtime helps with to get a later wake up, because I think you said he's waking early now. All right. Um, a couple more pre-submitted questions. I think there's 2 more, and then I'll switch to live questions, you guys. Okay. Megan Wood, 16, said, almost 3-year-old has been going to sleep on her own since 4 months old despite a few hiccups. Started a new daycare about a month ago and adjusting well there. Finally is back to taking her hour and 45-minute nap or so. Took until this week to get that at daycare, but has always done this amount. Oh, it's great that they've been able to get that back on track. Since about the week of, or maybe before, she's been needing our hand to hold to go to bed. Oh, she's awake at 6, goes to bed around 12 for the nap, sleeps the hour and 45 minutes or so, and then is up around 1:30, give or take. Bedtime around 8. Within the last 2 weeks or so, she's fighting bedtime a lot to where she's tired and knows she is, but fights it. I just tried to re-sleep train her and cried, screamed, jumped in her crib for 50 minutes. I went in to calm her down 3 different times, which just made it worse, but she kept throwing her lovey. Okay. First of all, I love that she's still in her crib. Do not let anyone tell you, switch her out of the crib and it'll fix this problem, because it will not. So, sounds like she's in her crib, which is great. So keep her in the crib and fix the problem. Um, I am happy with that nap length. I answered it someone else's question earlier, over for a 3.5-year-old. For 3, I use same thing, an hour to an hour and a half, and an hour and 45 seems good, particularly if you're going to daycare. So I'm fine with that. I don't think you need to do too much there, particularly since the nap starts at noon. That's great. What I would do is move your bedtime up, because when you're saying you can tell she's tired, she can tell she's tired, she's having a hard time falling asleep, that makes me think she's in her second wind mode where we you can be tired, but there's a time where you have this natural pull to sleep. I like to call it a sleep wave, and then when it passes, it's a little harder to fall asleep. And so we all have them. You can hone in on your own. Mine, for example, is like 9:30, 9:45. Once I stay up past 10, it's like, watch out, world. I can stay up and work on a project or do whatever. Um, because I kind of move, even though could be super tired, but I've moved into second wind mode. So we need to be thoughtful about that. And a lot of times with this age group, that second wind is kicking in between 7 and 7:30. So I would stick with the noon nap, stick with she's up around 1:30, which is fine. I would just say like up by 2 at the latest, and then try lights out at 7. And I would set very clear expectations with her, um, where, like, when you say you re-sleep train her, one thing that's different from, I think you said you did it 4 months, different from 4 months to, like, 3 years old, is these are, like, walking, talking, very opinionated little kids who have much more mature, um, brains and ability to, like, be agitated or wonder what's going on. And so I would set clear expectations. So you would say, for example, starting tonight, we're going to, whatever your bedtime routine is, and then I'm going to put you in your bed and it's time to sleep all the way until your light turns green. If you aren't using a hatch light, I would recommend it. And then you would say, and starting tonight, I'm not going to hold your hand. So, for example, you said you've had to hold our hand. If we're not going to do that, we have to be very clear that we're not doing that. So starting tonight, I'm not going to hold your hand. If you are screaming and crying for mom, I am going to, whatever sleep training method you are implementing. So tell her what you will be doing. So you want to be clear with this age what you will no longer be doing and what you will be doing. And your expectation would be that she sleep in her bed until her light turns green. There is, um I have a workshop, given her background of being a good sleeper, I actually have a 1-hour workshop that goes, like, blow by blow through a method to implement, and she's, like, the perfect candidate for it in the sense that this is a regression. It's not like she has not had good sleep habits in the past. So, it is called How to Quickly Recover from a Sleep Regression, and it's for this age group. And it's $27. So it's for this age group and kids still in a crib. So $27. You can find it at sleepandwellnesscoach.com under, I think it's programs. And that might be helpful to you if you want like blow by blow instructions. But if you're like, we already have a plan we want to do, just be sure you communicate to her what you will no longer be doing and what you will be doing, and then try an earlier bedtime. Okay, I already did that one. Hold on, let's see. I think I might be almost done here. We did Andrea's. We got that one. Got that one. Got that one. Kelsey. Okay, this is my last one, and then I'll take any live questions. Kelsey said, "Hi, Haven is 4 months old and is still swaddled in her bassinet in our room. 2 questions. When should we move her from her swaddle bassinet? And 2, should it be a gradual change or just rip the Band-Aid to sleep sack in her nursery?" Okay. So, um, this is an interesting one because I'm assuming, so if she's sleeping well in your room, like let's say she's sleeping through the night, you kind of have that choice of, do I go ahead and just move her to her room? Um, and once you move her to her room, absolutely, I would get rid of the swaddle. So once she leaves your room, she would leave the swaddle. Um, or is it that you're gonna have to do some work around her sleep? If you're gonna have to do some work around her sleep, I would also move her to the room so you aren't having to do it in your room and to her room. Without having like all the details of what her sleep looks like, my general recommendations are, once we hit 4 months, it's best to get them out of the swaddle because you don't want to limit their movement. And most pediatric physical therapists will encourage you to do that because the swaddle does limit their movement. And kids learn and do a lot of movement in their crib. And as you know, because this ain't your first rodeo, Kelsey, they like to become tummy sleepers. And so when we remove things that are kind of holding them tight and of impacting their ability to move around, we kind of move that process around. So what I typically recommend is go ahead and just do it all at once. There's no one right way. You can do any way you want. So I don't think there's like a perfect prescription for this. But I usually say, like, let's just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. Let's put them in their sleep sack and put them in the crib. And then like forge ahead. And if she's sleeping well, it'll usually take a couple nights for them to adjust. Sometimes it's seamless and it doesn't take any time for them to adjust. If she's not sleeping well, I would do it in conjunction with like implementing a plan to improve her sleep. Also, though, if you're like, she's sleeping so well, and we want to break up with the swaddle, but we would like to have her in our room longer because she is sleeping so well, then you could try to keep her in the bassinet with a sleep sack if you wanted to keep her in your room longer. That's like a personal choice for everyone, I think. But those are my thoughts. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay. Let me scroll back here. I know I saw a live question. Katie Pearl. Hello, Katie Pearl. You said, do you find children who share a room ages 4 or 6 have a harder time falling asleep than children in rooms alone? Yeah, I was just we have a regular meeting with the sleep coaches on my team, and we talk through like current cases and all the things. And so we had that meeting yesterday, and this topic came up about um, some things that are particularly challenging in the work that we do. And one of those things is navigating room sharers. And I wouldn't say necessarily yes, to answer your question, Katie. Some kids will have a harder time falling asleep when they share a room because there's distractions. There's another human being in there, so there's distractions, there's more energy in that room, there's energy to engage with, but usually we can overcome that. The bigger pain point that I think is hard, that I'm always very upfront with people, like, I cannot guarantee you that I can fix this, is when we have 2 kids who have different natural wake times. So, for example, my own 2 kids when they were little, one could sleep till 7. That was kinda her natural wake time, would be, like, not consistently 7, but, like, 6:40 to 7. And then the other one was an early riser, and so when she was little, hers was, like, 5:50 to 6:15. So we had a noticeable difference, and of course, my early riser is my more impulsive child, and so when they had to room share, which they did and still have to a lot when we travel, she really struggled to resist the urge to wake her sister in the morning. And I used to always say to myself, like, "Thank goodness we don't have to have them share rooms at home because it's just a tricky thing to navigate." And I have worked through it with a lot of clients. There are things we can do to set them up, but it can be tricky. The falling asleep, 100% is trickier if kids are in the same room unless they're good sleepers, naturally. But that is more easily fixable than the morning wake issue because there are things you can adjust around, um, timing of sleep, how we lay expectations with the kids, how we respond to them. Occasionally, we'll short term separate them and then bring them back together. There are just more options to fix the falling asleep issue than there are to fix the morning wake time if kids have different natural wake times. So, hopefully, that answers your um, question. Okay. I think, though, that's the only live question. I wanted to tell you guys when the next um, nap chat is, which is in June. Not that day. It is on June 19th, Friday, June 19th at 12 p.m. So if you want to mark your calendars, what you want to look for to guarantee your question gets answered is to look for a post on Instagram on Thursday, the 18th. I try to get that posted first thing in the morning, and you can submit a question in advance, and then you're welcome to join me live, or you can always come back and watch the recording and get your question and see your question answered there. But thanks for joining me today. You can learn more about how we can work together at sleepandwellnesscoach.com, and check out the podcast, How Long Till Bedtime. And I will see you guys back here next month. Bye for now.